Great. So I'm going to give a brief introduction to all of the EBI services, some of the things that we've been working on recently, some of the things we're thinking about for the future. So just to give a little bit of background here, the European Bioinformatics Institute, or EBI, is one of the sites of European Molecular Biology Laboratory, EMBL. It's an intergovernmental organization, so we get our core funding from contributions from all the member states of Europe that are part of the EMBL. And there's six sites in total, the headquarters being Heidelberg, and other sites being Grenoble, Barcelona, Hamburg, and Rome. But one of the primary focuses of the EBI is in bioinformatics and the provision of bioinformatics data services. So the usage of the data resources has actually accelerated in the last couple of years, probably as a result of the pandemic. Actually, we thought that the usage would go down when people went back to work and stopped playing with their computers, started doing some more experiments, but actually this has not happened. And it doesn't really matter how you measure that usage, whether it's IP addresses or web hits, or even data submissions. They're all increasing dramatically, and a stepwise increase since about 2020. And just another measure of impact is the number of times that people cite the data resources that we run on behalf of the communities that use them, how they cite them in papers. And I can tell you, by lunchtime, there'll be another 10 papers that have been published that cite EBI data resources. So very high impact. This is a graph that looks very similar, only on a slightly shorter timescale to your graph. Basically, it's a logarithmic scale and everything still goes up. But this is just to point out that we have a number of deposition databases at the EBI where people deposit experimentally derived data, and they go into thematic databases. This is a sort of quite a unique role of the EBI in a way. There are very few places in the world that will take experimental data and store it for reuse by anyone who wants to use it. But this is just to point out in the green lines there that the majority of the data that we hold is about 90% of it is sequence data. But one of the most one of the types of data that's increasing at the largest rate is actually imaging and imaging related data. So we're a number of resources, about 40, and these cover all of the sort of domains of life, if you like, from chemicals and small molecules through obviously to genes and genomes and RNA, proteins, imaging more recently, variation and disease, and then very importantly, from my point of view, the literature and ontologies that help give that sort of knowledge background to the submitted data. And many of these data resources are fundamental for life science research and have been recognized as such by two mechanisms. One is the Elixir Core Data Resource Process, where they've been designated resources of global importance. And more recently, just actually a few months ago, highlighted as many have been highlighted as global core biodata resources. This is moving beyond the European context into the global setting. And some of these resources are, like I said, deposition databases. That doesn't mean to say that they're just files on a server somewhere. We do quite a lot of curation and organization. And to the point where some of the other databases around a knowledge base is a little bit more like KEGG, where there's a lot of curation and basically synthesizing all of that information into more human readable formats to broaden the usage of the resources. So we do manage these databases quite carefully. We have various processes that keep an eye on the usage, on the need, and so on. And so we really have a sort of idea of an EBI data resource lifecycle, where when we invent new databases, which we do so with a lot of community need and input. And an example in this case, a very relatively new database, is the Bioimage Archive. That's been running since 2019 and is still in a very early growth phase, through to long-established databases that can continue actually for many decades. But sometimes those databases go into some kind of decline. That might be because the field moves on, that the type of data that is based upon is is not as popular as it used to be for doing research, or it might be that there's better ways to do things, or more integrated way to do things. And two of the resources we recently retired in that sense is PFAM, which became integrated into Interpro, into a larger infrastructure, and Array Express, which was array data, microarray data, which is increasingly less used for expression analysis. It's moving more towards RNA-seq and so on. And so we have a process by which we can retain that data, make sure it's available for everybody to continue to use and refer to, but in a sort of more sustainable way. And we use our biostudies database to do that. One thing I want to highlight throughout this talk is the absolute necessity to run these data resources through international collaborations. The EBI, of course, is a European-based organization, but all of the major data resources that we run are done so in collaboration with global partners. Just picking one example here, which is the structure databases, the PDB, now has a parent organization, if you like, called the WWPDB, and that has core members in Japan, the US, and in Europe. It has a lot of sort of satellite databases that make heavy use of and integrate with those core archives. Pride being an example of that, the proteomics database, and a lot of some of them. Well, I'll talk about AI in a moment, but there's a lot of dependencies also on these core archives to do new things and develop new models and AI algorithms. And one thing I wanted to point out here is that these databases are very open to new members, and there are on-ramps and processes by which new national nodes, if you like, in data delivery can come on board. And an example in the space of the PDB, Protein Data Bank, is PDB China, that's just come on board as an associate member, and discussions are also ongoing with PDB India. As we are a European-based organization, one of the really important, relatively recent ways in which we understand what our users need and how we collaborate to deliver some of our resources is via Elixir. And Elixir is one of the sponsors of this meeting. I'm sure most of the people in this room are familiar with Elixir. It's a node-based network, and each national node networks nationally to incorporate currently about 245 institutes and universities throughout Europe. And the hub that manages all of that network is based at the campus in which we work in Cambridge, UK, near Cambridge, UK. And this is a really critical part of what we do, is to understand what our users need, but also in terms of submission, but also in reuse. And this is a vital mechanism for us, and demonstrated, I think, recently last year in the delivery of federated EGA. So EGA is a database for human data, for controlled access data. That means typically that data can't travel outside of the jurisdiction in which it was generated, i.e. can't go across national borders. And so what we've done at the EBI is develop the central EGA node, and this was with Barcelona in Spain. And these two central nodes have supported and have given rise to this sort of federated model of the federated EGA. And these Spanish, German, Finnish, Swedish, and Norwegian nodes were launched, if you like, last year. And there are many more discussions in progress, both in Europe and beyond Europe, as you can see from the world map, various stages of maturity. So sometimes the data really does need to be federated, and one must follow these models in order to share the responsibilities and ensure that all of the data in some form can be accessible via. Okay, so two recent major drivers for us have been the COVID-19 pandemic and artificial intelligence. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about these things in a moment. But basically, the reason why we could be responsive to these two, well, one is as an invasion and one was an emergency, obviously. But our ability to respond is based on the fact that we behind the scenes, as I think we just amply had demonstrated in the previous talk, there's a lot of work going on to receive submitted data, curate that data, organize that information, share that data with partners, and make it available to everybody to reuse, which then often creates more data for the databases to handle. So there's this sort of strong foundation there. And this is perhaps exemplified very well in the COVID-19 data portal, which was developed under the leadership of Guy Cochran, who we'll hear from this afternoon. But really, this pulled in data from data portals all over the world, but also integrated that data with data from the EBI databases. And you can see that the variety on the right here, the variety of resources that are made available in that data portal, including the research literature. So this is not a new database. This is basically an interface on top of lots of existing databases, pulled together in a thematic way to make it easy for people to find information on viral sequences or anything else related to COVID-19. I have not been at the whole conference, but almost every session I've been in has talked about AI or machine learning, and this is just a step change in the way that we're thinking about analyzing data, doing experiments, and gaining new insights. And I think one of the key roles for data resources such as those hosted at the EBI are to provide high quality reference data for those AI models to be developed upon for training them. And this means, our traditional audience, I guess, has been, well, from bioinformaticians to biologists, but now also to computer scientists who are really the ones who are often driving the innovation in the AI sphere, not necessarily biologists. The second way we can use AI is in our own processes to make our own, for example, curation processes potentially more efficient, to really leverage what the human efforts, if you like, with machines in a more effective way. And that is really a selective process. I think we're really all about experimental data at the EBI. I don't think we're going to incorporate every single model that anyone ever develops, but we will use useful things where we see they're useful. So of course we can incorporate, and we have developed AI-driven databases, and the famous one, of course, is the AlphaFold database. This means we're going to have to be very, very careful in the future for our users to understand the difference between experimental data and models. And basically, there's a whole new area, I think, of outreach and training on that differentiation. So every now and again, we get a huge step change. We had the human genome 10 years plus later. We have AI, and perhaps the most famous example of this is the AlphaFold algorithm developed by DeepMind. And the thing I want to point out here is that that would have been absolutely impossible to develop that amazing piece of machinery without the core data resources to train that data on. And I'm talking here about UniProt, the PDB and Magnify database of metagenomic sequences. And so you have that element, and then you also have the capacity element, where at the EBI we have people with a huge range of skills, from hardcore software development right through to bioinformatics and biology, which meant that, again, we could be responsive and develop under the guidance of Samir Velankar, who also runs the PDB at the EBI, the AlphaFold database of predicted protein structures. And there's 200 million, very, very quickly as well, within months. And there now is 200 million protein structures in that database, one for every protein you might find in UniProt. And the usage of it is extraordinary. And in fact, the AlphaFold algorithm and database have been cited over 4,000 times in the space of about a year or so, which is actually unprecedented, I think. So the reason why we do this is that, because not everybody can and not everybody want to run AlphaFold for themselves. So the idea is that it's actually a little bit green, perhaps, as well, in that we are, doing this kind of processing so that other people don't have to do it. And actually, I did see a talk yesterday where the AlphaFold database was attributed, so that person didn't have to run AlphaFold for themselves. In that sense, they could just look it up. I just want to say something, because when the introduction was mentioned, I used to run a Europe PMC, and so the literature is close to my heart, and it's a little bit of a different context for the literature, because not all of it is open like the rest of the databases at the EBI. You can read the literature in Europe PMC, but there's actually only about 40% of it that you could pull out automatically that is licensed for reuse. So that's like machine readable licenses, exactly what you can reuse and how. And I just think, I'd love to see some of the large language models which were based on text and data, text mining algorithms to really come back to text and deliver some really cool tools that allow us to filter the literature and curate our databases in a more efficient way. So that's a plea to the text miners in the room. Okay, so one of the things we have to do often and all the time is horizon scan for where the next. We need to anticipate what the needs are going to be if we're going to deliver what the community needs. And I've talked about a little bit about human health in terms of the federated EGA, where we provide sort of core data infrastructure and participate a lot in the development of standards. We don't do the clinical research. We do the standards and infrastructure. And of course, the COVID-19 pandemic, which can obviously extend to other potential pathogens and antimicrobial resistant pathogens also. In terms of biodiversity and food security, again, I want to just pick another example of how we sort of are very collaborative in terms of both interfacing with lots of different projects in lots of different countries, providing the infrastructure where all of that information can be coordinated and combined. And it's not just one database that does that at the EBI, it's usually a collection of them. And so the resources don't stand alone. They're all connected in a way, and have all these codependencies that mean that we can actually deliver what's needed. And an example here is a couple of the projects for biodiversity, the Darwin Tree of Life and ERGA. And between them, they deposit samples in the biosamples database and sequence in the ENA, and then Ensemble provides the view of that genome based on the raw data. And then all of that information can be reflected back into the project websites via APIs or however people wish to do so. This is a very good example of the kind of ways that we work at the EBI. I'll talk a little bit about sustainability and technical paths to sustainability. And one of them is three examples here. Of course, we want to develop our software to make all of the resources future fit and anticipate new user needs. Some of these resources have been around for decades, and as anyone who's run a resource for decades knows, that some of the software gets a little bit out of date, and you have to come back and you can have to fix it. And we call this sort of technical debt repayment, if you like, but really it's about making sure that we can meet future needs. So that's something we plan on doing in the next few years, having a sort of structured program around that. And then we have to just think about how we can manage our data growth. I mean, at the EBI, never mind elsewhere, with federated models or anything like that. We have to really think about how people are using the data, if we can put some of the data on cold storage, some of it on hot storage, what is our cloud use versus our on-premises storage strategy, and how can we compress data so that we can keep as much of it as we can in useful ways, in the most cost-effective way. And then finally, as exemplified by the COVID-19 data portal, I think our approach to sort of thematic needs is not to develop brand new databases, but to pull data in with certain filters and so on, and then have experts on that theme curate that data in situ in a data portal. Ultimately, however, though, I think the EBI is, of course, I think it's a wonderful place. It does wonderful things, but it's only one institute. And I mentioned right at the beginning the need for international collaboration. And one of the things I think we really do need to do, because this need is not going away, it's just growing constantly, and it's beyond the scope of one institute to deliver absolutely everything that the world needs for data science in life sciences. So we do need to expand our existing networks, if you like, to build collaboration with major emerging economies such as India and China. I think we absolutely need to impact on new global drivers such as biodiversity, climate change, global pathogens. We do need to really think very carefully and act upon our need to have a more inclusive data infrastructure model globally. And this means, of course, collaborating with some of the major global bodies such as the GFGH, WHO, UNESCO, but also really ensuring through a program of work that the data that are in our databases is equitable. That means it's just as useful in contexts that are not the global north, as well as thinking about how we can co-develop models for data sharing with low middle income countries to ensure that that all of the data can be accessible in the most fair and useful ways. So this is where the Global Biodata Coalition comes in. To cut a rather long, story short, is that we do really need, we need to think about how we structurally deliver data resources, but also how we structurally fund those data resources on a global scale. And so I won't say any more about that because I think we're going to have more later, but this is an incredibly important part of sustainability, is how we fund these things. So I'd just like to say thank you for all our staff. We have around over 800 staff, with, if you include all the visitors who help advise us on many things, from 65 countries in the world. And as I mentioned, a multidisciplinary skill set, not just researchers, scientists who became developers, developers who became scientists, and all of the administrative support that we have for all the grants that we have to apply for, and actually just running the campus. So thank you very much. I'll take some questions.
Thank you very much. It's really amazing to see the work that's happening at EBI and the 800 staff. I started at EBI many, many years ago, and there were 84 people at EBI. So it's grown somewhat since then. So questions?
I also like to say congratulations. I mean, I think especially the COVID work that you showed really shows that, if you do work properly from early on, when things like this happen, you are ready for it, and it's great to see. I was thinking, many times projects start in-house with the idea that someone we're going to upload data to one of your portals, and when between people in the team disappear, information gets lost, and by the time one is uploading the data, many information is kind of lost in between. And I think it would be great for some of your portals to have the capacity to deploy them in-house, so that we could force the researchers to deploy, so to say, to our in-house portal, which just looks just like yours. And then later on, we could just, transport the data exactly as it should be already to your portal, if it's 3 years later, 3 months, or 10 years.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea for sustainability, as well as shared sort of responsibility. And I think, there's a model of data portals for the ENA that has happened. I think I can't remember how many there are now, but those are sort of locally managed views of the database, if you like. And I believe a lot of almost everything that's developed now is open source. So, there's a legacy, of course, that isn't, but it's slowly but surely, all of the EBI is becoming an open source project, if you like. Yeah, it's a little patchwork, because we have to sort of prioritize dealing with the data. But I think when we come back and do our technical debt projects, that's the time to make everything open source.
Wonderful to hear the progress, Joe. You challenged the text mining community to provide better tools, and I want to turn that around. The large language models that are most popular are hard to do science with. They're commercial, they change without notice. They were trained on God knows what that they won't tell us about. I think there's a real need for an open large language model trained primarily on biomedical data, say EPMC. And it's been really hard to figure out how we're going to build such a thing. It's not really in the scope of, or rewarding for individual researchers to do. Would you consider taking that on?
Me personally, probably not. I think it's a question of, I think we'd have to do it in a collaborative sense. I don't think, I think if we could, we would, but it would have to be funded, and we need the right expertise. We don't, some of the, when we use AI in our processes, we don't develop it all in-house. Most of them are developed by external experts, which we then collaborate with in order to bring it in-house. So I think if something, that kind of dynamic could be established, then I think it would be fantastic, yeah.
So I want you to, Joe, that was great, thank you, to use your crystal ball. So, I think the COVID portal is a great example of where you've already got a series of resources that are not, they're under a sort of a technical similarity, but they're also under a sort of shared governance model by virtue of EBI itself. I know there's some variances there, but that gives you a lot of strength versus having a completely distributed set of data resources and different governance models and different ontologies, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm just thinking about, will this scale? In the future, with the amount of data and large models and so on that are coming, will the current way that we operate scale? And if not, where do you see the changes taking place?
Thanks for that one, Phil. I mean, I think
It's a hard,
To some extent-
question, but you're one of the best people that can answer.
right. Well, I think to some extent it does scale. I mean, we're taking all these measures to make it scale. I think at the moment, for example, Ensemble is the best place to annotate and produce whole genomes. But I think that ideally you would have some mechanism to share certainly the data archiving aspect. I mean, I think the Bioimage Archive is a good example where I don't think one database can hold all of the. I mean, it's just so big. So I think we'll have to come up with mechanisms where there are arrangements where some of the data is federated, and some of the roles might whatever you do with that data might also be federated. And I think that's actually a model that for example, the INSDC, the sequence databases are already starting a path down where there's an expertise on doing a particular kind of thing at the NCBI. They do that. Expertise on a particular kind of thing at the European Nucleotide Archive. They do that, and there's a certain trust in that relatively small number of people collaborating to deliver those services that they all need. So I think it's possible, but I do think you have to have the governance structure on top, and there will be big players. I think just indefinitely, but we can have more people on board as well with that right structure.
Dao Wei Lin from NIH, and you mentioned about the technical sustainability for supporting the operations. So, do you have some comments on what is kind of possible cost models for running different type of repository or infrastructures to sustain the system?
Cost models, gosh, I don't know. I mean, I think I'm going to talk to funders here a little bit, but when we get grants, we get a lot of what we do is based on soft money on grants, and I think what we need to do, and this is a plea to the Global Biodata Coalition as well, is to really recognize that we're not doing research. We're sort of using a research funding model to fund infrastructure, and it doesn't really fit very well. It's actually quite hard to get, in fact, sometimes impossible to get grant-based funding to do the absolute core work that's really needed. So all the invisible stuff that is essential is actually very hard to fund, and what does get funded are the sort of exciting new bits. So I think we just need we need to think about how we fund these things in a different way, and accept that a certain percentage of any award or any funding is actually to take care of the core and not just do the fancy new things.
Yeah, so I'll just take the advantage of having the last question then. It's related to the sustainability and the global outreach. So obviously LMICs are always underrepresented because we just don't have the resources to contribute to something like that. But, when you add, say, a new node of PDB, what is the requirement? Because you can't just add a node and then because they have a flash funding and then 2 years later they disappear. Yeah. So there must be some sort of criteria for longer term funding or sustainability for one of those to practically be part of that global network.
I can't tell you specifically what it is for PDB, but it takes a long time. And one of the, so that's sort of an on-ramp really. This is why they're associate rather than full to start off with. But I do think, what was I going to say? The criteria, yeah. One of the hardest things is to get institutes to commit for the long term. So it's partly not just about the funding stream, but also the hosting institute has to sort of be in it for for the long term, whatever that means. I think that's quite a difficult argument to have in anyone's local context. Yeah.
So I think it's something that's going to be important, and particularly with data sovereignty coming on, getting everybody involved.
Yeah.
So thanks very much, Joe, for a fantastic talk.